Hey all. So this is War 10, the war that got canceled and cut out with the rest of the season. So you're going to see a couple odd fights. Funnily enough, the way our map lined up, we figured out that it was possible to do a boss rush with only two people. But obviously, that meant that energy was going to be a problem. And so I kind of pathed myself in there, and me and Tafre both moved early to help those guys out. If you're wondering why we did a boss rush, then it's because of what you're seeing right here. This man thing has high ground active. Man-Thing is not a high ground defender. Something was messed up in the last patch that seems to have removed the filter that only applied high ground to certain champions, and so it was on every single fight on the map. Now, Man-Thing is doable with that. In general, he's not too bad, but also specifically against somebody like Claire or another poison immune, because while she is poison immune, she's not armor break immune, and so she is going to get that debuff and she's going to heal from it. And then, as far as this node is concerned, the very first buff immunity permanently turned off arc overload, and so we don't have to worry about that at all. We don't have to worry about the unblockable. The unblockable will come back when he throws specials below 50% if we let him get that regen, but we don't plan to. So, very safe counter. Claire also does an absolute ton of hits because she has an 8 hit special too, and so high ground never gets above 1 stack. Very easy to keep it in control, especially because we're in the poison mode already, which means that she's not going to push him red and we can be nice and aggressive. My next fight is also pretty doable with high ground up, but there are a lot of fights on the map that are not doable with high ground up, or at least not reasonably. Like Nick Fury in a lot of places. I think we actually ended up taking. No, not us, but another BG did take down Nick as part of their boss rush and was able to get through it, but it was just significantly harder than it normally would be, and it was just a mess overall. I've heard a lot of people talking about how, something along the lines of, it's the same global we've been dealing with. Why don't you just, pony up and deal with it? And the funny thing is that in the conversations I've had with those people, you eventually tend to get to something along the lines of, well, we planned around it as soon as we heard about the problem, and that right there is the key. As soon as you heard about the problem. How did you hear about the problem? Because my guess is it was because you heard that somebody else went in and got surprised by the presence of the problem. And that means that a lot of people out there had already died to this problem or entered lanes relying on somebody like Quake, who is now completely useless, when this was discovered. And so that actually gives all of the alliances that entered late, or especially certain tier 1 alliances like ours, that spend time doing individualized node by node planning, time to hear about this and react that not everyone had. So, removing this war from the season was absolutely the right call. And then further, ending the season was the right call because apparently Kabam wasn't able to lock war rating, and that has a huge effect. A lot of alliances in the place where we are pretty comfortably into tier 1, we're actually talking about intentionally losing the war, and that sucks, but the thing is that it probably will give you an easier matchup, especially if everybody else around you is intentionally tanking, because then it's going to be that much easier for the matchmaker to put you with people who were significantly above you. And that's a very dangerous spot to be in if the win that you just fought for doesn't count towards the season, and now you have two more wars that you probably need to win against harder opponents than you otherwise might have had. Yeah, it's really distortive that way. And then there are alliances that were like right on the cusp of tier 1, either just above or just below, who couldn't afford to sandbag, who needed to push through and either boss rush or otherwise play a much more difficult war than normal to make sure that they stayed in Tier 1 or crossed over into Tier 1 to have any chance of the standing they were going for. So, as rough as it is to have the season cut short, that happened to SSx once after we had a really bad run of wars and locked us into Platinum 2 back over the summer when there was only a 6 war season when the start of these input bugs happened. So I do get it. It is not fun. But unfortunately, it really was the only right move, in my opinion. It would be nice if war had not been broken in the first place, but we all know Kabam is continuing to work on its quality assurance. Anyway, like I said, we were trying to boss rush so that we were in the position to win if this war counted. Then, when we were told the war wasn't going to count, but the season was going to continue, we put out a global pause on all advancement to see what we needed to do to put ourselves in the best possible position for the last 2 wars, because we knew we needed to win at least one, probably 2 of them, if the season was going to continue. But then once Kabam announced their decision that the season wasn't going to continue, then it was just a free-for-all to clear fights and practice, right? Because in off-season, you're often running into non-ideal or non-realistic defenses. Often defenders are placed with recoil. It's just not really a realistic picture. But we had already planned out a full clear of the map, and all of the defenders were placed with realistic mastery. So this is about as good as practice gets. And we had a lot of people boost because, a lot of us have either boosts that are going to expire, potions that are going to expire, or just figured the practice was worth it because hopefully we're getting 3 weeks off and some compensation to make up for that. So we were boosting for a lot of it. I actually did not boost for these last few fights, and that's just because with the ones that I was taking, I knew basically how these would go, and I knew I didn't need it. I knew they were just going to be slow, but with the war not counting and the season not counting, that doesn't matter. I also knew that I was going to have willpower healing available for both of these first 2. From the special concussions from Overseer on Killmonger, you saw how incredibly easy that fight was. You basically just use the counterpunch to get your openings, True Strike turns off his auto block after his specials, and you heal from the concussions. It doesn't get any easier than that. Also class advantage. And then Claire here is fantastic because she gets the willpower healing from the ineptitude off of his special 1, which doesn't really affect any of her abilities. And I believe we started out, our first special 2 was in Plague mode because I like to get a little power control in off the bat. And then we switched over into Hellfire for the direct damage and so that I can finish my combos without triggering empowered immunity. Because sometimes if you have to finish or you feel like you want to do those 5-hit combos, but if there's empowered immunity on and the defender is poison immune, you can actually work against the power control that you gain by triggering that. So for this kind of fight, even though I will often tell people that your default in a difficult fight should be Plague, because there's a reason that it could work against you, sticking to Hellfire for the extra damage is significantly smarter here, in my opinion. You also can block more of these special ones, but along the same lines of this being a practice war, that also means that I was pretty sure I had the evade and I wanted to go for it. I would have done the same thing against Apocalypse even if I might not have otherwise. Also notice that I brought the Arcus synergy. My Arcus isn't really ranked up, but he allows Claire to use 15% less power on specials, which is kind of like a power back boost with some boosts on in some ways, so very good synergy for her. I haven't actually taken Rage with Claire in a long time, like multiple seasons. I have sent other people to it, usually going well, but sometimes not, and so this was a really interesting one for me, because I I really wanted to see just how it felt, especially with the return policy and playing around that. The extra power off the return policy is exactly why I started out in Plague here, switched to it quickly, and then stuck to it. Notice that while we have buff immunity on, there is 0 risk to parrying him because he can't possibly have an armor up. But I also know that even though we are throwing some poisons on him, unless we take time out of our rotation to throw heavies and place more poisons, which is what I did against Man-Thing, then he's just going to be healing a lot here. And at some point I do switch over to Hellfire because I am winning the HP race here. We just passed the 1 minute mark out of 5, and so what I needed to be to win the HP race, or to win the time race, was just below 80%, and I was at about 70%, so that's fantastic. But I am going to switch over. Now what that means is that because I am not running power back boosts, or at least I don't think I am, we'll see pretty clearly once I do switch. If I'm not running power back boosts, then I have to be more careful about not having as much uptime on my my buff immunity off my special 2, and that means that I might trigger return policy, and so I am going to need to be careful. So here I go ahead and throw it right away because I don't want to do a full combo to switch into Hellfire without him having buff immunity up. Because if I do that and he triggers an armor up or 4, then I might go red, which would be very bad, and he might gain armors and then they would get nullified and he would gain a ton of power. Or worse, he like triggers a few armor ups and then a few furies that maybe I didn't. Yeah, it could be bad. But then I think we let him throw this? No, we step back into it. Yeah, so no power back. But if you did use power back, not to mention attack boosts in a real war, then it would be easier to chain them here. There's also no reason not to just take advantage of Mystic Dispersion even with return policy, because Black Panther's specials just aren't that scary. You can afford to bait them out and take advantage of Mystic Dispersion to get to your own specials. I think at this point I got a little impatient. Yeah, and I just throw this. I should have probably blocked one more hit and then thrown the special 2, but 2 of those work fine. So, some good practice, completely unboosted for those last 3 fights. Like I said, at that point, there wasn't really a reason to conserve items, but there also wasn't really a reason to burn items if I was still getting good practice out of the fights without them. As for the season overall, it does feel a little weird to get our first Masters in a while off of only 9 wars and not 12, because I think we really were in a position to get it off of 12. We had a rough start, like a lot of alliances seem to this season, but we were turning it around. The last 2 wars for our battle group specifically had 3 deaths, 2 if you don't count my weird interaction with Guardian against Maw, and then no deaths. And the alliance overall was at 4 deaths, discounting the disconnects, and then 9, which is not amazing, but it was also 9 after a bad start, which means that we stemmed the bleeding like I talked about last video, and that's a very positive direction from where we were early in the season. So I do think that we probably could have won this war without the issue at the global. And I think that we probably could have won at least 1 more war this season and ended in a really good spot. But regardless, we only were in Masters after this war because of how well we played the last 2, because we were already turning it around. And so I'm still really proud of the guys, because there are a lot of alliances out there that were starting to turn around, but did so later on in the season, and so didn't end up where they wanted to be. I feel for them. Like I said, we've been there before and it sucks, but I'm really proud that we were able to put in the work to avoid that ourselves this time. And it's nice to be back in Masters. I'm looking forward to the rewards. Last I heard, they're still going to come out around the normal time, Tuesday night or so. So sometime around then or Wednesday morning, look out for rewards opening. I think I should probably have a couple features lined up, maybe we'll get something worth ranking. But until then, thanks for watching and take care.